right. So you haven't seen last week's episode, but last week I did start off with some music, and it went do 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 do
Yes.
do do. Oh, you saw the preview, yeah. So
Derek, yeah, it was Derek, wasn't it? Was it? Yeah.
yeah, so it hasn't been
Okay.
published, but we do some music now, and so if you wanted to do the intro music, that would be great. So go ahead.
What to tap a tune?
No, yeah, you just have to do the. We're just looking for some really good intro music. So if you could sing
Okay.
us,
Oh God.
maybe a 15-second song as intro, that'd be fantastic.
Wow. God, on the spot. Did it do style?
Yeah, no. Anyway, any style you want. This is open mic. This part. We'll edit this, so don't worry. I'm not going to put anything embarrassing.
Well, it's probably going to be about 5 or 6 seconds. Something springs to mind actually. Do 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 boo, which is from a well-known UK
Oh right, yeah.
TV program.
I used to have UK TV Anywhere before it got shut off by the BBC.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. Do 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 do.
Well, I do.
Boo. Perfect. All right, Arron. Why don't you introduce yourself, introduce your business, and tell us what you're doing nowadays.
Okay, yeah. So my name's Arron Moss. I am a CEO and founder of a little-known company in the central UK, in a spa town called Buxton. The agency's called 01. We've been an e-commerce agency formed in 1999, and we've been devoted Magento only SI since around 2009. I believe we first looked at Magento at 1.3, and as a business, predominantly working with open source and probably OS Commerce at the time. Gradually, as many others did, got really bitten by the bug of making the platform work well for then smaller businesses and startups, and we've really grown with the platform over that time now. And I'm probably right in saying that maybe we are still one of a somewhat diminishing proportion that still are solely working with Magento. I certainly know there are a lot of agencies that are perhaps looking at more than one platform at a time. I don't know if that's a strategy that I've consciously and kind of made the decision over, or it's just pure British stubbornness, to be fair. But I think the devotion to a single platform, in my mind, will pay dividends. Certainly to us, I hope, in the way that we've, I think, capitalised on that focus, and that's it. And we stand here today really as that business, but in two forms. I think is the best way to explain it: as an SI in a more traditional sense, and as the beholders of a product that is about to kind of extract itself from our traditional business. So we kind of sit here twofold in a sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, just to get down to the nuts and bolts, what I wanted to talk about is the product that you're doing, MDOQ, right?
Yeah,
where you're helping developers and essentially then merchants streamline the CI process. Would that be a good way to look at it, or a development process inside of Magento? And I don't want to get into.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
That's a great start, and actually not getting into the technicalities of it is an amazing help for me as we take the product forward, because this is the most challenging aspect of bringing the product to market. We could describe it in many ways. In simplistic terms, it's a tool belt for the Magento application in one sense. Yes, it includes key components such as deployment pipeline, but there are a whole host of other areas of the application all founded around automation, really. And I'm going to steal an analogy that I tripped across, courtesy of Mr. Marks last week. MDOC is the glue in between this freedom of open source and the constraints of SaaS, which, as he perfectly put it, the guardrails, the doors are locked and the guardrails are up. And open source, as with Magento, has been both its greatest strength and greatest weakness over the years, of that sheer openness to the platform, this protection in the middle, as using the metaphor of guardrails. We believe MDOC is giving that unique kind of central position to the benefits of both. You can protect the platform with automation and a shielding almost, so you can have the power of open source without necessarily locking the door and closing, and throwing away the key. That's a work in progress, first to air analogy. So we'll see how that one gets received, and I might work on that.
Yeah, I think just to educate any merchants, the idea of how you would traditionally run a website is you or your developer would log on with FTP or SFTP or something and modify the code directly on the server, and hopefully it works. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you break things, and then you scramble to figure out what you want to do. Along came version control, and then we would publish things to version control and then publish things maybe to FTP. But again, we're talking directly to the server. Certainly, this was a habit of many developers up through M1, and then along came, and you can help me here, but along came compilation. That would then add a little bit more complexity to the build, or let's just call it the complexity of the actual running website. Compilation is nothing new to, say, .NET or some of these other technologies, but Magento 2 would then compile itself and allow for a faster runtime on production. But it also meant that logging in with FTP and just modifying a file, which again was never good practice, ended up being even worse practice in this case. So the traditional route for a developer now, or has been for a long time, would be to work on your local machine, publish that to a development server, or publish it to your repository, which then would get deployed or published to a development server, staging server, production server, or wherever you'd like to publish it to. So I think, and this is, I think, where you're going to come in. What we've seen is the complexity around those builds on your local machine, especially with some of the new technologies that have been introduced into Magento, are making that even more difficult. And I think MDOC now comes in and helps any developer get onto a project quickly. And I know we spoke before that the time for a local setup has grown, and agencies have to start looking at how much time each of their developers is taking to make that local setup work, just to get started to work, or get their development going, because they have to get that running on their local machine.
Yeah, I mean, you've really explained, I think, the key challenges of us as a business. And I think one other piece of background from our SI agency, really, and a key factor is that, as you've just explained, this time to effectively preparation time to become a billable asset, as it were, in the agency world. I recall, actually, the first insight we had into this was it was actually from Gary Spector. It was on a partner call with Magento probably 5 years ago. very early days of the enterprise cloud launch, and they were kind of pitching enterprise cloud edition as the early stages of the business as it was kind of coming to market. Said that they'd surveyed all the Magento SIs, and the aggregate estimation for preparing as a developer to carry out some work on a Magento installation was 1.5 days. And I thought, wow, that for us, we're a small agency that we actually love working with the application for smaller businesses, and quite frankly, for the majority of those small businesses, and we do focus on open source. Many of those businesses would struggle to bear the cost of the man hours for 1.5 days for a lot of the small iterative pieces of work that we do anyway. We can, on a typical day, we're rolling out 2 to 4 hour developments in a very, very iterative kind of CI CD way, so there's deployments happening all the time, and to effectively, like, potentially top and tail with prep and QA and the rest of the acceptance process at the end, a 2 hour piece of work. You see this massive inflation in what we can assume might culminate in this heightened TCO that is the kind of hot topic at the moment. So the platform costs for us were just unrealistic for smaller businesses. So we thought we took the learnings from some of these really large clients that we've had the fortune of working with, and we developed the process, and everything that we did was about iteration, it was about replication, and it was about taking a process into become an automation, and then eventually it's manifested into a product that's really becoming quite rounded. So one-click replication, so you click a couple of buttons and you have what is as near as we can get certainly a development environment, but to feel as local as it can, very, very quickly. And by quickly, I mean generally between 5 and 20 minutes to have a full functional instance ready to work with from a development or a QA or a support or an exploration or a sandbox basis. And we realized that when we had the early seed of this, that we felt for us we had something that we could really take forward, and we've just continued. We've continued, albeit on the time saving aspects of what it began to deliver a few years ago, and actually we've been able to put more and more of our internal resource to make it better and better and better. We're really happy with where it is today. It's used quite extensively by a number of businesses, and we've got some exciting prospects. And as you mentioned before, the ever complex application stack, specifically as we move now towards headless and PWA, it gets ever more complex for an individual, say software engineer, to get a local working environment. So we believe remote, RDEs with automation around infrastructure replication. Well, we hope that that's where the industry will go, and it seems to be the case. We're getting really strong evidence now. We've got a couple of larger clients who MDOQ facilitates PWA projects as well using Vue Storefront. So for 6, contract JavaScript and CSS coders to be able to be brought into a client's office and spin up working Vue Storefront dev instances within minutes with no localized or DevOps or local infrastructure requirements, and to be working and delivering usable code to that wider application that they don't need to become involved with is very exciting. And some of the customers that are using it are getting excited about the speed that they can deliver kind of project iterations. So yeah, I don't know if
Yeah, no,
that's...
I think I want to key in on that 5 to 20 minutes, and maybe a lot of merchants don't understand the amount of time a developer could take in creating their local environment, especially a new person who's just been introduced to the project. And I would even say that a developer then who is primarily front end, who would maybe he or she isn't that familiar with some of the intricacies of some of the parts of Magento, they might spend a little bit more time, or they need some help from a senior dev to get some of these things running. The solution that you're offering, really for 5 to 20 minutes, if we're taking an average of 4 hours or 3 hours or whatever that time frame is, depending on the level of the developer, to get it up and running. Certainly, if it's a longer term project and you have a developer working on it in the long term, and that 4 hours or 3 hours or two, whatever that time frame is negligible over a 2 or 3 month period. But having an agile group and having the ability to bring in front end developers to offer and supplement work with the realization that, hey, we're going to get in here, we're going to get up and running in 5 to 10 minutes. Wow, that's fantastic. And I don't think, I think it's very difficult for a merchant to understand that the need for that and the complexity of that, and how much time that will save. Um, you spoke a little bit about the whole process, the QA process, and just bringing somebody in for, let's just say the merchant has something they'd like to do and it's sort of last minute, and their regular developers on vacation, or as an agency, you want to be able to help them. Having the ability to easily spin up an environment and do that quickly is imperative. So I think, if you could just speak a little bit to the fact, I mean, to how a merchant should be sort of looking at the time frame from code to get to live, and how can an agency improve that time frame. I think that would help everybody understand like the importance of what you're doing, and how that will really help developers over time. And then I think at scale too, the more developers you have, the more complex it is to keep everybody on the same page.
I think the key for me is, and this could be where, I don't know whether we've got this right or wrong. This has been my kind of firm opinion of the last couple of years, in particular respect to, let's say, the DevOps culture and the practicality of, let's say, deployment pipelines. Now, there are commercial pieces of software that you can work with that can help manage that process. But if you look back over the last 10 years at other peripheral sectors of e-commerce, then let's take email marketing, for instance. Now, that is very much 10 years ago. The whole mechanics of email marketing and how that evolved and to become intelligent with not necessarily even AI, but the level of benefit and progression of how static emails to global email marketing lists slowly progressed through the innovation thinking of the agencies and the merchants on how they could be more successful. And then slowly over the years, it became the intellect, which then eventually became the product. And obviously now we have very flourished market, a sector with businesses that have very rounded, powerful software solutions that encompass things like AI. So you've got Dot Digital, and then obviously you've got this whole visual merchandising sector as well, and there's certainly a convergence between these. Now in DevOps, there really hasn't been this breakthrough of these systems are all kind of very much back end. It seems to be always retained as being within the intellectual property, typically of the agency, if the merchant is small, or if it's a large merchant, then there's usually very risky assets, probably the best way to explain it, of DevOps engineers. That again, it's not an open policy, and it's not an open kind of culture. It's usually key people either within the agency or within the merchant that actually hold the keys to that kind of process and the progression of DevOps within a business. And what we would like to think is that, like any other sector that evolves alongside e-commerce, is that it needs to really, as it can, break into commercially competitive products that can introduce automation to all these processes to effectively, as I said earlier, it's bring the protection, and it's to fight back with protecting open source with software automation that kind of brings this utopian kind of best of both, really, between open source and SaaS. And that's really what we're trying to break through and try and convince the industry that opportunity is we feel the single most let's say fruitful way to reduce total cost of ownership, certainly for a platform like Magento, because the colourful array of and difference, that stark difference in costs from SIs and merchants and all people delivering on the Magento 2 platform for us is kind of worryingly disruptive, because of there doesn't seem to be any leveling of costs, and that for us this is one way of controlling that by introducing that kind of layer of application and automation that we hope will bring a bit of stability to ownership costs for the platform.
Yeah, so let me just speak right to this whole SaaS versus the on-prem or self-hosted platforms, and look at it from the merchant's point of view. Traditionally, when we were just doing things with FTP, the process to update your website was fairly similar. I guess in the SaaS world, you would go log in and make some modifications to your theme. The more complex your theme is, the more, more skill you'll need in doing those modifications. And I guess I'm assuming, because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm assuming there's some version control in the theming, inside Shopify or something. That somebody will correct me if there isn't version control. If there isn't, wow, that's going to be horrible. But I'm assuming there is. In the traditional FTP world, there was no version control unless you had it on the server itself, which a lot of agencies would do. Then from a SaaS platform, you probably have a staging environment that you could publish those changes to a live environment if you wanted to do some kind of testing. I think what you're saying is your solution is very similar to that process, where even a merchant who had some light development knowledge or just had to change a color in a CSS or something like that could log into a staging server. And if they had the same sort of skill set, they could, I'm just being very theoretical here, they could modify that code on the server and then publish that to live.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I oversimplified that.
I think it's a really good attempt to kind of bring me back to the simplification that I need to really to be able to communicate as we take the product forward, because I'm often really dragged into much deeper conversations. Now, and another way to put it is let's take a couple of like real world current scenarios. So if you're on M2 and you want to look at a PWA, or let's say somewhere in the middle, you want to look at the Hoover implementation. Now, you may be a merchant who just wants to bring an expert in who's got a year's worth of experience in Tailwind CSS. he doesn't care about the Magento infrastructure, the application, the stack, or anything. He's just brought in because he's a tailwind guru. Now, this fully facilitates the fact that you can spin up a replication from production. It manages the source control branch off, and it gives you effectively like a root access to a server that is in total isolation. So you can go and do what you want. You can allow, with just the provision of an SSH public key, that individual to do anything, to run havoc if they want, because you can destroy that infrastructure, or you can click a button and it will analyze the file structure and it will report back a suggestion of what's going to go into source control. So you can accept that work back in. And this is for me, this was the missing link in the failure and demise of what was with Magento 1, the Connect system and the admin system. And in the Magento 2, it was, I forget what it was called, but it died in 2.3.5. They removed it. So the extension connector interface, without a marriage of changes on the Magento application to source control, you're left with only risk, So we couple those things together, so we can install a module and the system knows exactly what's been done. So you give a Hoover expert access to a server and tell him to go and do what he needs to do, and he finishes at the end of the day, and you click a button and it'll say, here's the changes. Now we can accept those into source control, and you can click another button and it'll go running regression tests all night, and deploy automatically if you want. If you've got really good regression tests, automation is it is the future, and it sits nowhere in the accessible commercial domain as let's say as the productized agency, which is why we get such disparity and confusion with the marketplace and TCO, that is at the mercy really of the agency. So yeah, I think we take that culture outside the agency and put it independently, and it means then that the merchants have better platform control. They feel like they have more control over the application because they do, and the agencies and the experts can work more independently because the kind of operational culture of the website in terms of its progression doesn't need to live externally to the merchant. It can belong. So agencies can deliver code to source control, and that's their responsibility done. Application infrastructure, that's what platform as a service is. So this just basically takes control and makes it more independent.
Yeah, and I think from the merchant, so again, kind of looking at this through the lens of the merchant, if they sign up for a SaaS-based solution like BigCommerce or Shopify, they don't care about the infrastructure. They don't care how the code gets to the server. They just want it to work. And I think the reality is that merchants on Magento would also like it to work, but they would also like to do everything they want to do inside of Magento or inside of their application, which they can do anything. So we talked about some simple things that can get easily published to production. The reality is that there's some very complex things that are not even possible in a lot of the SaaS solutions, that as a developer and as an agency, this helps you to get those things into production much quicker and much more efficiently. And I'm just gonna go out on a limb, much more with a lot more safety in terms of visibility on code, visibility on how well that code works in a near production environment, and then getting that code live, and even let's just say that there was something missed in QA or something missed in UAT, or there's some third party that's on the production that nobody tested and it didn't work. Going backwards is also easier. like some regression or some return one step backwards. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is where, as a business, I suppose, beginning with its passion and eye on the smaller business, that, to be fair, the majority that we talk to, probably glaze over if we start talking about deployment pipelines and in some cases regression testing. I think that visibility and exposure of us as an agency to those enterprise level businesses where that level of operation is an absolute necessity to de-risk. They 100% is kind of almost, I mean, they call it now configuration as code. This is where Magento is going. It's, to have to jump into a Magento admin system and frantically configuring things because code has just gone live at the same time. That's where we lived in Magento 2.2 and certainly Magento 1. And as that has progressed, and we now have this evolution and this concept of CAC and configuration as code. Now, thankfully, thank the Lord, we can take exact configuration of the Magento application alongside new code and deploy that live instantly at the same time. So the configuration all happens in unison with the deployment. That de-risks so much, and it's been such an eye-opener for us to be able to take that methodology down to our smaller clients, because with many of those, it really doesn't take much in terms of disruption, and we want to be deploying 50 times a day. If we have to have operatives and people who are skilled to go into Magento admins for smaller businesses and go jumping around, changing configuration and turning and configuring a new module that's just gone live, it's not the scalable progression of the application. And I think as those features have been introduced to Magento, rightly so, it points the progression further in the sense that there is almost an inbuilt deterrent from maybe working in Magento admin too much to configure the application. With this now ability to lock the configuration down to give people less of a reason to be interacting so much with the application. We've seen it so much where you can go into Magento admin 1 or 2 and change a setting and cause a problem, and I think to take even that aspect, and there are small merchants that probably wouldn't like this, but when you show them the benefit of everything going through a process of automation and therefore baked into source control, then changing a setting in system config here, away from production, never in production, away from production, that even itself as a configuration change goes through a regression process, then actually we start to understand that we are without locking that door, we are moving towards SaaS without becoming SaaS, and gaining both benefits and flexibility. And that's for us and smaller businesses. That is showing a remarkable opportunity in again cost reduction, because we're not mopping up and we can click buttons and deploy and know that we don't have to have 3 or 4 resources ready to maybe pick up the pieces after, because all we need to do is increase the regression testing and the processes in pre-production, and production really starts to take care of itself.
Yeah, I want to key in on 2 pieces there. The first piece is the ability for the merchant to really screw up their store. I'll just be very blunt. Really screw up their store by just logging into admin. It can happen in any. You can screw up your BigCommerce or Shopify or Magento, and I think that you've really brought up a great point that they should be screwing up their store in some non-production environment, and getting into that habit. So the first part is just doing the habit of playing with some of these things. Your typical merchant would never log into staging just to see what happens when they clicked something. They would most likely log in, click it in production, and if it breaks, they would go back and unclick it. The unfortunate things that happen in real life is they've clicked it and now suddenly they're locked out of admin. So the ability in a set, now they have to call some call center in some far off land. It could be Newcastle, who knows? And try to restore that. But getting into the habit of doing things in an appropriate way and educating the merchant on how this should happen is, I feel, the first step in just best practice around e-commerce in general. Not Magento, not BigCommerce, not Shopify, not any of those other platform shopware. Helping them to understand that, oh, yes, the code should go through this process, but even the configuration should go through this process. And then that will help them to be a better merchant, but also just a better store owner, and understanding that some of the things that the store owner does will impact their production environment and what they could be doing. Or a lot of people are going to have a staff. What their staff is doing is impacting their live site, and how that live site impact will reduce their sales at some point if it stops their site from working for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in taking, well, kind of similar kind of analogies from other areas of both Magento and other industries. I mean, you have the concept of, well, take the enterprise staging, for instance. I mean, that is a feature that allows content to be staged before it's made live, or and from a marketing perspective, planning and visibility of a marketing event in the future. Now, again, that's for us. It still doesn't really encompass everything. The whole application. There are always individuals within a business, and the more that can be involved, the better. The more innovative the business is, the more accessibility of any kind of staff members involved to get access to, call it a sandbox environment, an environment that they can do anything with. The more value they can deliver to the business, and potentially drive that business forward. And that doesn't necessarily it's not isolated singularly at marketing events. It's the whole Magento application. It's how can I maybe use this new feature to understand whether this configuration is better, or this method is, this extension can be used in this way, and to sandbox that somewhere away from production, as you say, is absolutely, well, it de-risks what's happening in real life now on production, and it gives you the safety net of doing it away from production, and the fact that it is kind of an infinitely replicable system that you can clone 20 instances of production means that there are not individuals tripping over each other saying, oh, you've just done this, let's just knock this out of the, you can have individual instances, or you can work on a team environment for a particular activity. Again, like content staging, but it starts and stops at content staging for planning marketing events, and of course that's only a commerce feature. So it's one of those things that it doesn't serve the community and the open source customer base. So we had this thought 2 years ago, and we built into the infrastructure. It was a system time change. So actually, you can spin an instance up, set the system clock on the container and just say set this future date to next week. And then all the facilities of open source that can schedule campaigns and design changes and rules were effectively there in commerce, because you were setting the system date on the installation to 2 weeks in the future. So that was kind of, wow, yeah, that could work. That's just turning it into the enterprise scheduler, because we're setting the date two weeks ahead. That's just another byproduct really of just a really good brainstorming session. But there are so many other ways of really drawing much more out of the Magento open source application than are really getting credit for at the moment. I think that's the main. I think the
Yeah.
open source and the community is relatively quiet, and that is both scary and in a sense disappointing. And I think Hoover, hopefully us, I think there needs now to be a resurgence to really not bite back, but really push out this content and show the world really how amazing Magento open source in its foundation really is.
Yeah, so 3 points, and then I think we're going to run out of time. The first point is just education around the sandbox idea. And the reality is the merchant should already be used to sandboxes. If they're running PayPal or any payment gateway, they never want a pub. They want to make sure their payment gateway works before they go live. They all give you the ability to do a sandbox. So a sandbox should never be something the merchant doesn't understand. And if they don't, as an agency or developer, you should be educating the merchant about this concept of a sandbox. And I think that you brought the idea of a sandbox right up front, and a big differentiator, I think, between what you're doing and what a SaaS version is doing, or even the traditional way of running a Magento store, the ability to have 10 different environments. And how many people have a merchant that has so many great ideas? They want to test every idea every day, but that idea is stepping on this idea because developer A is working on this, or developer B, and like the merchant is saying, well, just add more people to it. Okay, well, your solution does add the ability to theoretically add more production people, because we can segment that development process into thin little parallel silos that then can be merged in later. So I think those are the sandbox thing, and then the ability to have all these different environments. Certainly the different environments is something that is a big differentiator from the traditional SaaS model. But this, I think that would help merchants see the value in what you're doing, and help them to understand that value will actually get their code live faster, even then in something, like a SaaS environment.
Yeah. And I think that this conversation we have quite often with businesses of all sizes, and I think it boils back to this concurrency. I think is the one key thing that you honed in on was we have some larger clients that we, I suppose, invite to exploit the application, in the sense that it could be QA, it could be exploratory, it could be training, it could be bug, it could be a small feature subset of a much larger delivery. We've got some clients that have up to 50 concurrent instances, and what that does is it creates independence, and then it creates an opportunity for brand new ideas to go straight through to production. Obviously, critical issues to be independently fixed and go straight through. And as we know, businesses change and adapt almost on a daily basis. So what could be a priority to the business last week, that might change next week. So a level of concurrency to allow the streams of work and ideas to change pace means that it buckles this traditional, oh, well, the rest of the business can only really get visibility of that feature in 3 weeks' time, because UAT, which is usually the only kind of accessible point that the business gets visibility, is there, and that's behind another 2 work packages that there's a bottleneck because it's a single stream. Well, all these instances are globally visible at any point. So it's, for us, things that stop-start decisions, people go on holiday, and all these other normal business activities that can slow and speed up individual streams are facilitated.
Yeah, and so I have my last point that I wanted to talk about, and then let's just kind of recap what you just said. I like that concept, the concurrent concept, but the reality now is that headless is going to necessitate merchants to look at some hosted solution like a PWA, and that they have to continue to think about how that code gets into production. So I, I think, well, Magento is a good example of how you can run anything headless on top of it. But BigCommerce now allows for any PWA, and View Storefront has a solution that runs on top of BigCommerce. So making sure that your developers understand that process, even in a SaaS environment, and I guess um, how that can help the merchant, the agency, the developer to streamline the process of getting that code live. No matter what backend solution they're using, it could, at some point it could be commerce tools or it could be shopware. There's an infinite amount of solutions that the MDOQ solution can provide that would help the entire workflow happen faster and more efficiently. And I think the key, the bottom line key is that it happens safer.
Yeah, I mean, with PWA, we looked at PWA, we looked at the customers that we had at the time, and at the time we made the firm decision to focus firstly on View Storefront, and we have now a facility and support within the MDOQ application for View Storefront as a stack, and yeah, to kind of answer kind of a couple of points there. It's broken into almost a 3-layer application stack independently and managed with MDOQ, in that you have your Magento backend in the headless sense. You have your caching layer, which is the View Storefront API, and you have effectively View Storefront instances. And those kind of 3 components are, not only can they be independent, that actually now affords some significant benefits with the right kind of infrastructure and the orchestration in place, so that, let's say, we can have a development backend. Now, it may be that you need to carry out some work on exposing, let's say, a point system. Developed a point system on open source, and that now needs to be in the back end in order to kind of exchange the relevant data. That needs to be exposed to a new development at the API layer, and obviously involves View Storefront API work. And then it could be that you can spin off 5 or 6 instances, all referencing that particular API layer, which is still in non-production. There's still an active development, but the people that are developing, the JavaScript guys here, someone developing a user interface for points and redemption and checkout, are all kind of fully independent. Sorry, I've got something ringing here, but I'm not entirely sure what it is.
So yeah, that's a great point. Having the ability to segment out those different processes allows future, let me just think, like future, the ability for new features to be introduced, and anything there's no restrictions on this that would preclude someone working in a traditional Magento environment. If they're working in a headless environment, they could be doing the same thing, just decouple the back end, moving a new back end. Your 2 front end, in that scenario, your 2 front end items are still going to be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's that, and I think that level of that, the slicing up, particularly with View Storefront, with being 3 key components, it affords that, and that progression almost marries, thankfully, with the direction that we're going in. We've got to introduce this automation, because a heavy Magento backend requiring all these application components with Elasticsearch, Redis sat in the middle have got to be populated, and we've got clients that take 16 hours to populate an index from nothing. To have to orchestrate that locally, just to do a bit of CSS on the front end is it's not feasible. It won't be feasible, and it won't allow Magento to retain the competitive edge as it attempts to kind of continue the kind of support for innovation and openness, as if the application stack cannot be automated from an orchestration perspective. So it's very exciting to see these other strands introduced to and as we converge more, like you say, you can swap out the back end, and the front end that you've developed on Vue Storefront could be connected to a different back end next year. I mean, that in itself is exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're almost out of time here. I did want to cover some important points on how to pronounce the Hoofa theme. It almost sounded like you were saying Hoover, which just means you're going to suck up the theme.
Is it Haifa? Is it Hoofa?
Yeah, I think I think it must be where you live. Definitely, Yissa had some points, and Vinay has some points, and Wilhelm has some points on how to pronounce it. The other thing is it is Redis, and I think that you mispronounced it. There is a lot more English speakers in the U.S. now than in England, so I would just stress that a lot of us in America do pronounce things the correct way, but we don't have to dive down into that. Well, great. This has been very informative. I hope that I hope the merchants I hope we didn't get too complicated for the merchants. I think it's important that the merchant, the developer, and the agency all understand how important that is. And I think one good way that we could end it with is if you could, in one sentence, say how this will help the developer, how this will help a merchant, how this will help the agency, would give us a good, kind of closing off point on why what you're doing is so important for our community.
Okay, I'll certainly try. I think to encapsulate all the potential benefits that are shared across those particular disciplines for us, it is the transition of repetitive activities in your professional capacity. A role in a business as a merchant, as a developer, is really is introducing automation where it needs to introduce a cost-saving benefit into the working development of Magento as an application for the benefit of all, not only risk reduction, but, as I say, significant cost saving. And it really is not unlike any other industry that's introduced the same methods to bring safety and cost reduction likewise to it, to progress the technology. So that's what we hope to do, and hopefully there'll be other platforms that emerge to, as I say, further stabilize and reduce costs for Magento as a whole.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate it. Arron,
thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Point. So no relation to Moss from the IT crowd?
No. Less hair as well.
Great. Well, hey, this has been really fun, and we should try to do this again. And as things progress, and as we, maybe even some demos we could do in the future or something like that. I don't know. Let's keep it open. And I love this. I love what you're doing and how you're helping the Magento community. And keep it up. Keep up all the good work.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Take care.
Yep. Thank you.